When my daughter's friend came to stay for a week, I thought it would just be noise, laughter, and coffee cups in the sink. I didn't reel. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. I love knowing where these stories reach you. It would make me question everything. It was a quiet Friday morning when the car rolled up the driveway, the kind of calm that usually hangs over my house before the weekend starts. I'd spent the morning putting away dishes, half listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. The stillness had become something of a companion over the years, predictable, comfortable, maybe even protective. Then came the sound of laughter. My daughter's voice, bright and familiar, followed by another, lighter, curious, unsure. When the front door opened, sunlight spilled across the floor, and there she was, Hannah, my daughter's friend from university. She stepped inside with hesitant grace, holding her overnight bag close to her chest. Her eyes met mine, and for a fraction of a second, something unspoken passed. Not attraction, not yet, but awareness. "Mr. Hale, thank you for letting me stay," she said, her tone polite but warm. "Please," I answered, offering a small smile. "Call me Daniel." Her handshake was gentle, her palm cool against mine. She smelled faintly of rain and jasmine shampoo, small details I wasn't supposed to notice but did anyway. As they carried her bags down the hallway, I lingered in the kitchen doorway, watching the two of them talk about school, classes, deadlines. Hannah had a natural ease, the kind that fills empty rooms with life. Every laugh between them echoed through spaces that had grown too used to silence. Later, I made coffee, an old habit when guests arrived. She accepted a cup, fingers brushing mine as she took it. "You make it strong," she said with a soft laugh. "My dad does the same." That word, dad, pulled me back to reality. I nodded, smiled, kept my tone even. "It's the only way to stay awake around here." She looked around the living room, eyes tracing the photos on the wall, my late wife, my daughter as a child, a younger version of myself trying to look braver than I was. "It's a beautiful home," she said quietly. "It feels calm." Calm. The word fit, yet for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel entirely true. That evening, the three of us had dinner together. I listened more than I spoke, letting their conversation fill the space. Occasionally, her gaze drifted toward me, quick glances, curious, never inappropriate, but enough to make me aware of every pause, every breath. When she laughed at one of my old travel stories, my daughter rolled her eyes, and we all laughed. It felt simple, innocent, human. But when the night quieted and I turned off the lights, the house didn't settle the same way it used to. There was a new energy, subtle, like a melody barely heard through a closed door. I told myself it was just the presence of youth, a temporary brightness that would fade when she left. Still, as I stood in the hallway, I found myself glancing at the guest room door, just to be sure it was closed, and to remind myself that some lines are best left undisturbed. By the second day, the house didn't sound the same anymore. There were softer noises now, the faint hum of conversation drifting from the living room, the quiet shuffle of footsteps upstairs, the sound of laughter echoing off the hallway walls. It wasn't unpleasant. Just different. I'd spent years getting used to silence, to the rhythm of empty mornings and half-finished cups of coffee. But now, when I came downstairs, the sunlight fell across the kitchen counter where someone had left a small trail of sugar, a mug with a lipstick mark on the rim. It was a reminder that someone young was living here for a little while, someone who carried warmth without even trying. Hannah and my daughter spent most of the day together, classes, shopping trips, long phone calls with friends. But every now and then, I'd find her alone, standing by the window, hair catching the afternoon light, or humming softly while scrolling through her phone. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, she walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, curious. "You cook every night?" she asked. "Most nights," I said, stirring the pan. "Old habit. Can't seem to break it." She smiled. "It smells amazing. Your daughter told me you used to be a chef." "Not a chef," I corrected, glancing at her. "Just a man who learned to feed people he cared about." Her smile faded slightly, not out of discomfort, but understanding. There was depth in her silence, the kind that belongs to someone who listens more than she speaks. At dinner, she laughed easily at my daughter's stories, but I could feel her attention drift toward me now and then, not deliberately, more like instinct. Our eyes met once, just briefly, when she reached for the salt. It was nothing, just a glance, but it lingered longer than it should have. After dinner, as I cleaned up, she stayed to help. "You don't have to," I told her. "I want to," she said simply, rolling up her sleeves. Her hands moved quietly beside mine, washing dishes in rhythm. The simple sound of water running between us felt oddly intimate, not in a romantic sense, but in the way presence itself can fill a room. When she dried the last plate, she looked at me. "You're easy to talk to," she said softly. "I get why your daughter says you're her best listener." I didn't know what to say to that. So I smiled, small, polite, though something in my chest tightened. That night, after they both went upstairs, I stayed a while longer at the sink, just listening. The house wasn't silent anymore. It breathed differently, fuller, warmer, alive in ways I hadn't realized I missed. And though I told myself it was just the energy of youth, something told me it wasn't only that. It was her, the way she carried light into the quiet, and left me wondering why it suddenly mattered so much. It was a Thursday night, the kind of quiet evening when the world feels softer, like it's holding its breath. My daughter had gone out to meet friends, leaving the house unusually still. I poured myself a glass of water and was about to retreat to my study when I noticed the faint glow of the living room lamp. Hannah sat curled on the couch, barefoot, a blanket around her legs, reading something on her tablet. The rain outside whispered against the windows, steady, soothing. She looked up when she saw me. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was still up," she said, smiling. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "The rain helps you read, huh?" She nodded. "It's my favorite kind of sound. It makes everything feel slower, like time isn't chasing you." I leaned against the doorway, watching the reflection of the lamplight flicker in her eyes. She wasn't wearing makeup now, and her hair was loose, slightly messy, real. Honest. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. She shook her head, moving the blanket aside slightly. "Of course not." We sat across from each other, the low hum of the rain filling the silence between words. She asked about my work, my travels, the places I'd photographed back when I used to care about capturing moments. I told her about an old trip to Kyoto, how the temples look different at dawn, how peace feels heavier when you've lived long enough to understand its price. She listened intently, eyes soft, as if trying to see the version of me that once was. "You talk like someone who misses things," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. "I suppose we all do, in some way. What do you miss most?" The question caught me off guard. I looked toward the rain, avoiding her eyes for a moment. "Noise," I said finally. "Laughter that didn't feel borrowed." There was a pause. A long one. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "You have that now." Something in the room shifted, not loud, not visible, but undeniable. I looked at her, really looked this time. There was no agenda in her eyes, no flirtation, just honesty. The kind that reaches you quietly and rearranges something inside. "You're kind," I said. She smiled, small, uncertain. "No. Just comfortable here." The clock ticked once. Twice. The rain softened. When I stood to leave, she said my name, softly, like a note carried by breath. "Good night, Daniel." It was the first time she'd said it without the formal Mr. before it. A small change. A dangerous one. I paused in the doorway, turning slightly. "Good night, Hannah." As I walked down the hall, her voice lingered in my mind, not for what she said, but for how she said it. Gentle. Trusting. And for the first time, I realized that connection can be as quiet as rain, and just as hard to ignore. The next morning, the house felt too bright. Rain had cleared overnight, leaving sunlight scattered across the kitchen like broken glass. The air was warm, almost heavy, and I could feel something unspoken lingering in the walls. I made coffee as usual, but my hands weren't steady. Every thought of the night before, her voice, the way she'd said my name, echoed louder than it should. I told myself it was harmless, that it was only a late-night conversation. But I'd lived long enough to know when something was changing. When she came downstairs, she wore a soft blue sweater and a quiet expression, like she wasn't sure what to do with the morning either. "Sleep well?" I asked. She nodded, offering a small smile. "I did." I heard the rain stop sometime after midnight. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held that same searching gentleness, the kind that felt both comforting and dangerous. We sat at the table with my daughter, but conversation didn't flow the same way. Every laugh felt rehearsed, every silence heavy. I caught myself stealing glances, then immediately looked away, afraid my daughter might notice something that didn't even exist, not yet. When they left that afternoon to run errands, I stayed behind. Told them I had work to finish. But truthfully, I just needed space, distance to gather myself. I spent hours rearranging small things that didn't need arranging, convincing myself I was in control. By evening, I'd built a wall of calm around me again, until she came into the kitchen while I was cooking. "Your daughter's getting ready," she said, leaning on the counter. "She said she'll be a few minutes." I nodded, focused on the pan. "You two going out tonight?" "Yeah." "Dinner, maybe a movie." She hesitated. "You'll be okay here alone?" The question was simple, innocent, but her tone wasn't. It carried concern, maybe something else. I smiled faintly. "I've been alone before. I'll survive a few hours." She took a step closer. Not enough to close the distance, just enough for her presence to reach me. I could smell her perfume, light, like wildflowers, and something warm underneath. "I didn't mean." She started, then stopped. "You just seem quieter lately." That made me pause. "I'm fine," I said softly, without looking up. "Sometimes quiet is safer." Her silence lingered for a beat, then she whispered, "You don't always have to be." For a moment neither of us moved. The sound of the simmering pan was the only thing between us. Then my daughter's footsteps echoed down the stairs, breaking whatever spell had begun to form. Hannah stepped back instantly, her composure returning as quickly as it had slipped. By the time they left, I was alone again, surrounded by the scent of dinner, the fading echo of her voice, and a truth I didn't want to name. Because I knew, no matter how carefully I kept my distance, something inside me had already crossed it. That Saturday evening, the sky turned the color of steel. Clouds gathered low and heavy until the first drops began to fall, slow at first, then urgent, drumming against the roof like restless fingers. My daughter had gone to meet friends for dinner, leaving the house to the rain and to us. I was in the study, trying to read, but every thunderclap kept pulling my mind elsewhere, to the rhythm of footsteps in the hallway, to the faint sound of her voice humming somewhere near the kitchen. When the storm deepened, I stepped out to close the windows. The air smelled of wet earth and electricity. She appeared at the end of the hall, holding a towel, hair slightly damp from checking the porch. "Looks like we're stuck inside," she said with a half smile. "Yeah," I answered. "It'll pass soon enough." But it didn't. The rain thickened, washing the world in silver streaks. She helped me move a few things away from the windows. Our hands brushed once, brief, unintentional, but enough to stop both of us. The silence after that touch was louder than the storm. We stood side by side, listening to the rain fight against the glass. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "You keep pulling away from me." I froze, unsure how to respond. "I'm not, you are," she interrupted gently. "You get quiet every time we talk for too long. Every time I try to know you." Her honesty disarmed me. I turned toward her, meeting eyes that didn't flinch. "It's not you," I said. "It's everything else. The way it looks. The way it shouldn't feel." She didn't move closer, but she didn't retreat either. People always worry about what others see, she murmured. But sometimes they miss what's actually there. Thunder rolled through the distance, long, trembling. I exhaled slowly. You're young, Hannah. You should be laughing somewhere, not standing here trying to untangle someone like me. She shook her head, a small, certain motion. You think being young means I don't understand connection? That I can't feel it when someone listens, really listens? Her words struck something buried. For years I'd been careful, composed, a man defined by control. But in that moment, control felt like another kind of loneliness. The lamp beside us flickered once, then steadied. She smiled faintly. See? Even the light's nervous. That broke the heaviness, just enough for us to breathe again. We ended up sitting on the couch, a careful distance between us, listening to the storm's rhythm. She talked about her parents' constant arguments, about how peace feels like something you have to earn. I listened, not as a man struggling with desire, but as someone who recognized pain wrapped in laughter. When the rain finally softened, she leaned her head back, closing her eyes. I like it here, she whispered. It feels honest. I didn't answer. I just watched the lightning fade beyond the window and realized honesty could be both comfort and curse, and that tonight, I was standing exactly between the two. Sunday came dressed in that soft stillness that follows heavy rain. The world outside looked washed clean, sidewalks shining, air cool and clear. Inside, though, the house felt heavier than it should have. The week that once seemed long suddenly felt impossibly short. Hannah's suitcase stood by the front door, half-zipped, an open reminder that her stay had an ending. My daughter was upstairs packing her own things, talking on the phone, her laughter echoing faintly down the hall. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper I hadn't turned a page of in 15 minutes. She walked in quietly. Morning, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried that gentle sadness people wear when they've already started saying goodbye in their hearts. Morning, I replied, setting the paper aside. Coffee? She nodded. While the pot filled the room with its familiar scent, we spoke about practical things, traffic, weather, their drive back. Words chosen for safety. But beneath them, another conversation breathed, one neither of us dared to start. When my daughter came down, the energy changed again, brighter, noisier. She teased us for being morning people, thanked me for breakfast, and checked her messages between bites of toast. Hannah smiled through it all, but her gaze kept drifting toward the window, toward the fading rain. They loaded the car a little after 10. The sound of wheels bumping down the porch steps felt louder than usual. I helped with the last bag, more to delay the moment than out of necessity. My daughter hugged me first, laughing about how short the week felt. Then Hannah stepped forward, slower, her expression unreadable. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Thank you, she said finally. For everything, the meals, the stories, the quiet. I smiled faintly. You brought the noise back, I answered. She laughed once, a soft, breathy sound. Then I guess we're even. She turned to open the car door but stopped halfway, glancing back. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with that same unguarded warmth that had filled the house all week. I didn't expect this week to change me, she said. My reply came slower. Sometimes it's not the big moments that change us. Just the people who remind us what they're worth. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The understanding hung there between us, quiet, steady, unspoken. When the engine started and the car pulled away, I stayed on the porch long after they'd turned the corner. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of wet leaves. The silence that returned wasn't the same as before. It had depth now, memory. Inside, I passed the guest room. The bed was neatly made, the air faintly scented with her perfume. For a second, I almost called out, not to stop her, but to thank her for bringing life back to a house that had forgotten how to feel alive. Instead, I whispered it to the empty room and let the quiet take it from there. Days slipped back into their old order: coffee before sunrise, the hum of the refrigerator, the slow rhythm of a life rebuilt on predictability. Yet the house didn't sound quite the same. The silence had texture now, like it was carrying echoes instead of emptiness. Her presence lingered in small ways. The mug she always used for tea, the faint jasmine scent that clung to the guest room curtain, the folded blanket left neatly on the couch. I told myself to put them away, but every time I reached for them, something in me hesitated. Maybe I wanted to remember that for one quiet week, my life had been filled with laughter again. A letter arrived 3 weeks later. Simple envelope, careful handwriting. Inside, her words were gentle, honest. She thanked me for letting her stay, for listening, for not treating her like a guest but like someone worth hearing. I don't really know what I was looking for that week, she wrote, but I found peace in conversations that didn't need to prove anything. I read it twice, then a third time, letting each sentence settle like rainwater into dry soil. I wanted to reply, something brief, kind, but I never did. Some exchanges are meant to end in understanding, not continuation. Still, on quiet evenings, I caught myself glancing toward the driveway whenever a car slowed in front of the house. Habit, I told myself. Nothing more. My daughter mentioned her now and then, how Hannah had started volunteering, how she seemed more grounded lately. Each time I nodded, said I was glad to hear it, and kept my tone even. But inside, a softer part of me smiled. Because that week hadn't just changed her. It had reminded me that connection doesn't belong only to the young. It belongs to anyone brave enough to let life touch them again. Sometimes, when the weather turns and thunder hums in the distance, I'll pour a second cup of coffee without thinking. I'll set it on the opposite side of the table and let the steam rise into the stillness before taking the first sip alone. It's not sadness that sits with me then, it's gratitude. She walked into my home as my daughter's friend. She left as a memory that taught me presence, patience, and the quiet grace of restraint. I didn't fall in love. Not exactly. What I felt was something quieter, something rarer, a reminder of what love once felt like before it became complicated by time. And maybe that's enough. Because life isn't measured by how many people stay. It's shaped by those who pass through and leave you changed in ways you never expected. When I close my eyes now, I don't see the storm or the goodbye. I see the faint smile across the dinner table, the echo of laughter filling a house that had forgotten how. And in that memory, everything still feels alive. If this story reached you tonight, leave a red heart in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe that some people are meant to pass through our lives just to remind us what it feels like to feel again, then don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories waiting for you here. Accepted about my life.